Tonight on Primetime, the United States warns Iran of new measures that have never been seen as the standoff in the Gulf continues. But Tehran insists that the Strait of Hormuz remains under its own control. The U.S. Treasury Secretary has warned that Washington is set to apply measures that have never been seen on Iran. The comments from Scott Bessent come as Iran insists the Strait of Hormuz will stay closed until its demands are met.
The United States says it can maintain its naval blockade of Iran indefinitely while preparing a new round of economic measures against Tehran. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the U.S. Navy can sustain its presence in the region by rotating ships in and out. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said further measures would be announced next week, promising unprecedented economic pressure. Washington has reimposed the blockade after briefly lifting it for a month in June. The restrictions have cut Iran off from a major source of foreign currency and added to the impact of earlier strikes on its energy infrastructure. Tehran has responded by tightening its grip on the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian officials say the waterway will not reopen until U.S. sanctions are removed and frozen Iranian assets are released. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has also warned Washington against what he called a dangerous miscalculation over the strait. Iran's military command says commercial vessels and oil tankers cannot safely cross without permission and supervision from Iranian forces. Two vessels operated by Abu Dhabi National Oil Company were attacked while traveling through the strait on Thursday, according to UAE state media. The UAE government blamed Iran. The disruption is adding to concerns over global energy supplies. The International Energy Agency now expects global oil supply to fall by around 4.3 million barrels a day this year, while shipping traffic through Hormuz has dropped sharply since the war began.
Tehran claims control of the waterway will remain in the hands of the country's military. It cited the U.S. naval blockade of Iran's southern ports as one of the main factors. A news correspondent Turaj Shireli reports from Tehran.
Iran has warned that commercial and oil tankers will not be allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz without the permission and supervision of its armed forces. In a statement broadcast late Thursday, Colonel Ebrahim Zulfaqari, a spokesman for Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters, rejected U.S. claims that vessels can continue to transit the strategic waterway normally, calling those statements false. The warning comes as Iran and the United States approach the expiry of their interim peace agreement with just 3 days remaining and prospects for reviving the 60-day ceasefire deal known as the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, appearing increasingly uncertain. The agreement has already faced difficulties over conflicting interpretations of its provisions, particularly Clause 5, which addresses shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, linking the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. Meanwhile, Mohammad Mokhber, an advisor to Iran's supreme leader, warned that Tehran could shift to an offensive strategy if its conditions are not met. According to the Vana news agency, Mokhber also accused the United States of failing to protect its allies in the Persian Gulf. The statements come amid heightened tensions between Tehran and Washington, with the status of shipping through one of the world's most important energy transit routes emerging as a key point of disagreement. Turaj Shireli, Foreign News from Tehran.
To discuss the latest U.S. pressure campaign against Iran, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz and the prospects for diplomacy, we're joined by Dr. Mark Meirowitz, professor at the State University of New York's Maritime College. Professor Meirowitz, welcome and thank you for making time to join us on the program.
My pleasure.
Professor Meirowitz, Scott Bessent says the United States will introduce measures that against Iran like never seen before. What could Washington realistically do beyond the sanctions already imposed on Iran?
Yes, but Scott Bessent also said that if Iran continues doing what it's doing, the Strait of Hormuz will become irrelevant. It will not be relevant. And he is correct in that, in the sense that the other states that use the Strait of Hormuz and nations around the world are creating workarounds to go around the Strait of Hormuz, which will make it eventually, hopefully, irrelevant. Iran is just acting in a counterproductive fashion. What Iran, and actually the latest news from the area is that a Liberian flagged dry bulk carrier is leaking, it holds 1 million barrels of oil, is leaking because it was attacked by Iran, potentially in a environmental disaster of huge proportions caused by Iran. So Iran not only caused an environmental disaster, which is a violation of international law, by attacking shipping in the area, but secondly, it closes the Strait of Hormuz, which it has absolutely no right to do, and it cannot argue that it has the right to control the strait, because the strait is an international strait. So I think that the main issue that we're going to see here is going to be not military, but economic sanctions against Iran. And the longer that Iran continues this approach, they're just going to continue to destroy their economy, which was already in very, very bad condition.
Professor Meyrovitz, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says Washington can maintain the blockade indefinitely. Is that a realistic long-term strategy, or does sustaining such a blockade create growing military and economic risks?
Well, look, it really is a complex question. I mean, you did report in your report indicated that the oil supply is being, oil price is going up, oil supply is being affected, all of these moving parts. The main moving part for the United States and for President Trump and the cabinet is the midterm elections in November.
Yes.
That is very, very important for President Trump, and that's why it is unlikely there will be military action. Yet, what the United States just did was it sent another aircraft carrier, the Abraham Lincoln, I guess the George Washington, to replace the Abraham Lincoln, which was there in the Middle East. So the United States is maintaining its military posture, but it's mainly emphasizing economic pressure. I did want to say, though, that the deal that was negotiated in the MOU didn't really have anything to do with the Strait of Hormuz. It had to do with Iran's nuclear program. And see, we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz and shipping. That's exactly what Iran wanted to achieve, and it achieved that by digressing and distracting everyone from the nuclear issue to the Strait of Hormuz. So what the United States in its chess move is basically saying, we're blockading you. That's economic strangulation. As long as you don't come to the table to negotiate a proper deal, we're going to continue this. And in the meantime, we've got the other states in the area, UAE, Saudi, etc., working on workarounds such as pipelines and other possibilities to avoid the Strait of Hormuz.
Vice President J.D. Vance has emphasized keeping oil and gasoline prices affordable for Americans as a major U.S. objective. Does this suggest that energy security is now becoming as important to Washington as Iran's nuclear program?
Well, I don't know if they're equivalent issues. And I don't think that is really, I mean, it's amazing that the original war was about, according to President Trump, the nuclear developments in Iran, that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon, and they had this nuclear dust, which is what Trump discusses, is that they have this dust, and the dust is there, and they want it taken out, the nuclear material. Now we're talking about Strait of Hormuz and energy prices.
Yes.
And that's why I pivot to the midterms, because that's really what J.D. Vance is talking about. Right? The president, the vice president are looking at these energy prices because energy prices are crucial for the Republicans maintaining the House and maintaining the Senate in the midterm elections. If President Trump loses in the House and loses in the Senate, that is going to be very, very problematic for him going forward into his end of his second term, and so he wants to avoid that. So that's why he's looking at that and trying to figure out a way to keep the oil, to keep gas prices stable. And so that's really kind of the tricky catch-22 here, which is to deal with the nuclear deal or to deal with the prices. And right now we're stuck. And I don't think there's going to be very much more happening between now and November elections in the United States.
So in your view, could Washington's attempt to restrict Iran's energy exports ultimately backfire by pushing global oil prices higher, especially if the Hormuz disruption continues?
As I say, I don't know the answer to that question because I can't predict the future. But at the same time, the United States has enormous oil and gas supplies. There are other countries. Venezuela has opened up its supplies as well. And as I say, there are the pipelines that this is the Habshan Fujairah pipeline and the Saudi East-West pipeline and all sorts of proposals and ways to move energy. That's a great impetus to do it. So maybe in the short term, there may be some hurt and issues on the gas prices, but I'm not totally pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic because I think Iran has to come to the negotiating table and unlock the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. To your report, they talk very, very mightily and strongly about all of these issues, but behind it, they are a paper tiger. Their economy is dwindling, it's shrinking, it's being destroyed. And that's exactly what the United States is saying. You keep up what you're doing, then we're going to strangle your economy. At the same time, come to the negotiating table and work out a deal. Now, here is the puzzling part that we scratch our heads to understand. Does Iran want to make a nuclear bomb? Well, if it doesn't, why doesn't it come to the table and negotiate with the mediators and work out a deal with the United States? So to me, what's the choice for the United States? Right now, obviously, domestic politics dictates that the United States is not going to re-up the military option here. I don't think so. But at the same, and also the dwindling stocks that the United States has. At the same time, the economic policy, as Besant said, is going to march on.
Professor Meyrovitz, what is the biggest escalation risk now? A wider military confrontation, attacks on commercial shipping, a prolonged closure of Hormuz, or further economic warfare? Well,
it just shows you, I think, this attack on the Liberian tanker, that, the nations of the region and the world need to stand together against this type. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Iran's claim to control the Strait of Hormuz has no basis in fact. It is a violation of international law. They don't have a right to charge fees, yet they insist that they control the Strait of Hormuz, which is ridiculous. Secondly, this environmental disaster, which I just noted, that just occurred on the Liberian tanker, which is leaking possibly 1 million barrels of oil. We're talking about an environmental cataclysm and disaster in the area. So, again, what is going to be the result of this? I can't predict it. But at the same time, I think it's unlikely that there'll be a military option before the midterm elections. Certainly, the Iranians are very, very sensitive to American politics. They follow it very well. They're quite astute at it. They know exactly what to do, when to do. But again, they've created aggression, and they violate international law with impunity. And that has to stop. Now, the MOU was just a letter of intent, and the purpose of that is to get a deal. My question again, I keep asking, why do they sit down and do a deal? Because they don't want to do a deal. Because they do want to develop a nuclear weapon. If that's the case, then that proves that the American policy is a valid policy, is a good policy to protect the nations of the region and the world from Iranian nuclear. Because as we can see, Iran is willing to attack everyone in the area, including the Gulf states, including everyone. So again, it's hard to predict the future. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that maybe they will come to the table. If they do, that's the end of the blockade. Very easy.
Professor Mark Meyrovitz, we have run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your analysis of these rapidly developing events. We greatly appreciate your time and insights. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Hopefully there will be peace.
After the break, Turkey reveals new details of its regional defense pact with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Turkey has revealed new details of its defense pact with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, outlining plans for joint military drills, political coordination, and deeper defense industry cooperation. The agreement signed in Mecca last week also includes a collective clause under which an attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all three. Adam Morrow reports from Istanbul.
Turkey has provided new details on how its newly signed defense pact with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan is expected to work, outlining plans for high-level political coordination, joint military exercises, and deeper defense industry cooperation. At a briefing in Ankara, the Defense Ministry said the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement would establish what it described as strategic political and military mechanisms bringing together the three countries' defense and foreign ministers, as well as their chiefs of general staff and armed forces commanders. The ministry said that cooperation will be expanded gradually, beginning with command post and field exercises before moving on to joint military drills involving land, naval, and air forces, along with air defense units and unmanned systems. Officials say the planned exercises are meant to identify operational gaps before any potential crisis, providing lessons that can then be applied to joint military doctrines, training, and planning. The landmark defense pact goes beyond conventional military coordination. According to Ankara, the three countries will pursue joint production of defense systems, technology cooperation, and logistics support, with unmanned systems, electronic warfare, and artificial intelligence among the priority areas. Signed in Mecca last week, the agreement contains a collective defense clause under which an armed attack on one member would be regarded as an attack on all three. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has compared the principle to NATO's Article 5, while stressing that the agreement is not directed against Iran or any other country. The Defense Ministry has also stated that the new mechanism isn't intended to rival or replace the Western NATO alliance. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Meanwhile, regional security has been at the center of talks between Turkey and Egypt in Ankara, with the two sides also discussing defense ties, the Strait of Hormuz, and the latest developments in Gaza. Here is more.
We are engaged in the Quartet framework, defense pact between Turkey, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, and Egypt has a very unique relationship on the bilateral level with all the sides of the Quartet, whether the brotherly kingdom of Saudi Arabia or the state of Pakistan, or with the Republic of Turkey, unique relationships which are not limited to political fields only, but extend to different fields. Naturally, Egypt is keen on pushing bilateral relationships with the three countries. In fact, without explicitly naming it, we started regional ownership and regional cooperation with a new spirit and a new vision a long time ago. Of course, this needed to be structured, a foundation needed to be laid. The foundation laid in Mecca by the three countries was truly a historic initiative put forth by our leaders. On this point, of course, we have been discussing this issue with our Egyptian brothers from the very beginning. We are consulting very closely. Egypt is one of the brotherly countries we consult with first on all the issues we address in the region, whether it be security, political or economic. This issue is important to us. Of course, they themselves have stated this. They are currently evaluating it with certain details, but Egypt is our natural partner. God willing, it will soon become our official partner as well.
The Mecca Joint Defense Agreement includes a collective defense clause, meaning an armed attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all three. Ankara says the pact is defensive, not aimed at Iran or any other country, and is not intended to replace NATO. To discuss the strategic significance of the agreement, its military implications and what it could mean for regional security, we're joined by Asif Tanwer Awam, international law expert and research associate at the Muslim Institute. speaking to us from Islamabad, Pakistan. Mr. Avan, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you so very much for hosting us and giving us this opportunity.
So, Dr. Avan, what does this agreement tell us about the changing security architecture of the Middle East and wider Muslim world?
Thank you so very much. And as you know, today is the 14th August in Pakistan, the Independence Day of Pakistan, when Pakistan came into being. And the Pakistani nation is celebrating its Independence Day. And we have seen, and I personally, we have received so many messages from our Azerbaijani friends on this congratulations. So we are very thankful to you people, especially to the brothers and the sisters of Azerbaijan. Secondly, as coming towards your question, as you mentioned about this defense pact, this is a very welcoming step for Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and not only for these three countries, but also for the Muslim world, because it is very important, and definitely it will decrease the Middle Eastern dependence, defense dependence on the Western countries, and it will give them more, I would say, autonomy, more independence, and this is a very welcoming step, and which has been widely cherished, not only in Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, but different other countries.
Mr. Avan, Turkey says the pact is defensive and not directed against Iran or any other country. Given the current regional tensions, how convincing is that explanation?
Yes, Turkey, as has rightly mentioned, that this is just a defense pact, and no country has to be, I would say, in the fear. And this is never ever against Iran. But you see the statements given by the spokesperson of the Iranian Foreign Office that they have welcomed this pact. So this is not a right fear. And I would say the countries are very much hopeful. And you have seen that many countries, Muslim countries, wanted to join this pact, especially the Egypt and the Qatar and some other countries has shown the willingness. So I think this is a thing which has to be welcomed instead of being fearful for any country.
The agreement says an armed attack on one member will be regarded as an attack on all three. How close is this in practical terms to NATO's Article 5 principle?
Yes, dear sir, as you see, the Article 5 in the NATO's Act, this is the actually core and the spirit of that Article 5, which says that the attack on the one country will be considered attack on the all countries. So similar spirit we have seen in this Makkah Defense Pact, that attack on any one country will be considered attack on all three countries, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. So in spirit, we would say there are much similarities. And this is, I think every country has the right to defense, and every country has under the international law having right to protection, and every country can exercise that right for their defense and for their protection, for their cooperation in the military, defense, and strategic side. And this is the right which has exercised by Pakistan, by Turkey, and by Saudi Arabia under the international law.
Mr. Aban, what would actually happen if one of these three countries come under attack? Is there a clear mechanism for military intervention, or does the agreement still leave major decisions to be negotiated?
To be very honest, as you know very well, that the clauses of this agreement are not open to the public, and that's why we know the spirit of this agreement, but what are the exact right clauses has not been made publicly. So definitely this is a first initiative and first step, and definitely many things have to be decided by the coming days and in coming weeks and coming time, and definitely things will unfold in a very better and very positive position, that the defense mechanism will be very much, I would explain that if any attack happened, then what will be the way forward. But what you see that Pakistan, being a nuclear country in the Muslim world, is very important country. And secondly, Saudi Arabia, it has also its own significance, because it has two holy cities, holy sites in Saudi Arabia. And if you see the Turkey is also I think the only Muslim country in the NATO and the very effective sitting on the strategic position, gateway of East and the West, and also very strong in the defense. So all three countries are very strong Muslim countries and very important countries, and they are coming together for their defense cooperation, their strategic cooperation, military exercises, and intelligence sharing, and to counter this any sort of act of aggression.
The pact also focuses heavily on defense technology, including drones, electronic warfare, and artificial intelligence. What capabilities could Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan realistically develop together?
If you see the defense capability of Pakistan, then I would like to share that the defense, heavy defense industry of Textila, which has developed the independently the masterpiece and the world's best tank system, the name as Khalid and Zarar. These are the world's best tanks in their efficiency, in their speed. Al Khalid can move on the speed of 80 km/h. Similarly, if you see Turkey, then Turkey also has proven their defense production, their drone system, their missile system is very effective. And if we see in Saudi Arabia, then in terms of their economic power and economic might is very much important. So these three countries can jointly, I would say, they can do the wonders. And one major benefit is that Pakistan being the nuclear country, then Turkey and Saudi Arabia, they will come under the nuclear umbrella, and they will have the deterrence, which before that agreement they don't have, but now they have this sort of deterrence because of this pact, which is called the nuclear deterrence, or coming under the nuclear umbrella, which will save them.
President Erdogan has indicated that the framework could potentially expand. Could we eventually see countries such as Egypt or others joining, and would expansion make the pact more powerful or more difficult to manage?
Sir, as you've seen that the internet and the websites and the international media is very much saying that many Muslim countries has shown, some of the Muslim countries has shown their interest to join this, especially the Egypt, the Qatar, and one and two another Muslim states. So definitely we are very much hopeful that in coming times, in coming days, we will see many Muslim countries will join this pact, and it will increase their more credibility, more strength. And secondly, we will see that it will increase, I would say, more efficiency and more collective power and more collective defense. I would say the Muslim world defense or some sort of thing like this.
Asif Tanvirawan, thank you very much for this discussion. We greatly appreciate your time and analysis. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so very much.
After the break, a full roundup of events from our correspondents across the region and further afield. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime here on A News. Kazakhstan and Pakistan are preparing for another round of high-level talks, with trade and new transport links expected to remain key area of focus. The Pakistani Prime Minister is due in Astana for a state visit, building on agreements reached between the two countries. More from A News correspondent Fariza Kalimursina.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif will travel to Astana for a state visit, according to President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, who was in Pakistan in February. During that trip, more than 30 commercial agreements were signed, valued at $200 million. The two countries have also set a target of increasing bilateral trade to $1 billion in the future. Last year, it stood at more than $105 million. In February, the two leaders also discussed transport and logistics. Pakistan offered Kazakhstan full access to its transit infrastructure and seaports. The talks also covered the ports of Karachi and Gwadar as possible new routes for Kazakhstan to reach international markets. Another theme was a transport corridor linking Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as a proposed railway connecting Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan and Pakistan. For Kazakhstan, these discussions are particularly important. The country has no direct access to the sea, but sits on major routes between the east and west and north and south. Access to Pakistan's ports could give Kazakhstan additional options for reaching international markets. And the state visit to Astana will now provide an opportunity to continue those discussions and see which of the plans from February can move towards concrete implementation. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A News.
Uzbekistan is introducing a new regime allowing some businesses to operate without licenses for up to 3 months. Authorities say the measure could lower barriers to entering the market and make it easier to test new business projects. Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
Uzbekistan has given entrepreneurs and investors more flexibility to test new business ideas before making a full regulatory commitment. Under a law signed by President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, companies in certain licensed sectors can begin operating after notifying the relevant authorities through the government's digital platforms. They will then have 3 months to meet licensing requirements and obtain the necessary permits. Once the 3 months period ends, companies must obtain the required permits or stop operating in the relevant sector. For investors, the key benefit is the opportunity to test demand and the commercial viability of a project before taking on the full cost of licensing and establishing operations. That could be particularly relevant for businesses entering the Uzbek market for the first time. The measure is part of a wider push to simplify the business environment. Last year, the government announced plans to abolish 10 types of licenses and permits and introduce the principle of starting a business in 15 minutes. Authorities say the latest changes should reduce administrative costs and encourage more businesses to launch and expand in Uzbekistan. Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
To Europe now, because in northern Greece, wildfires have reached the resort town of Siviri, forcing hundreds to evacuate. The country remains on its highest wildfire alert nationwide after a blaze near Athens earlier this month that killed 2 helicopter crew. Anita Sharma reports.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where firefighters continue to battle major wildfires as another punishing heat wave grips the continent. In northern Greece, gale force winds are driving a wildfire through the popular Halkidiki holiday region. Flames swept into the seaside resort of Siviri, burning homes and forcing hundreds of tourists and residents to flee by land and sea. More than 140 firefighters are battling the blaze, backed by 9 aircraft and 7 helicopters. 1 firefighter was injured, while winds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour hampered efforts. The fire brigade spokesman said the top priority now is to extinguish the fire and get people to safety. In Spain, 2 major fires are burning at opposite ends of the country. In the northeast, the Peñas de Rícolos fire in the Huesca province burned around 8,000 hectares, forcing 12 communities to evacuate. It also entered the protected San Juan de la Peña area, threatening its historic monastery complex, prompting the government to evacuate as many works as possible. In the south, the Niebla fire affected more than 31,000 hectares across Huelva and Seville. Its advance has slowed, but it remains active. The mayor of Berrocal, a small village in Huelva, said they will live in a, quote, prison of ashes for a long time. France also faces extreme fire conditions as temperatures approach 40 degrees Celsius. Across the EU, nearly 555,000 hectares have burned in more than 1,600 fires so far this year. With heat, drought, and strong winds persisting, the threat is far from over. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
The UK says Russian threats of retaliation will not change its decision to detain a sanctioned oil tanker. The vessel, which is described as being part of Russia's shadow fleet of tankers, was seized off the south coast of England in June. Zena Farizada reports.
The UK government is defending its seizure of a Russian-linked oil tanker after Vladimir Putin threatened retaliation over Western seizures of Russian vessels. The Smotos has been detained near Weymouth since June after Royal Marines boarded it as part of an operation targeting Russia's so-called Shadow Fleet. Its captain, AJ Pant, has been charged with breaching UK sanctions over his alleged role in transporting banned Russian oil. Putin has warned Western countries against further seizures. Speaking during Russian Pacific Fleet exercises, he described plans to seize Russian commercial vessels as piracy and robbery, and warned Moscow would respond in kind. He said any retaliation would not necessarily take place in the waters where Russian ships were targeted, but wherever Russia considered necessary. The UK government says the Smotos operation was carried out in full accordance with international law. It says Russia's Shadow Fleet includes more than 700 vessels carrying around 75% of the country's sanctioned oil. Britain says the trade provides a critical source of revenue for the Kremlin and helps sustain Russia's war in Ukraine. The confrontation comes as European countries step up the pressure on their Shadow Fleet. The EU has sanctioned more than 630 vessels, while several European countries have detained or seized tankers suspected of helping Russia evade sanctions. The Smotos dispute is part of a much wider confrontation over Russia's oil trade, with Western governments tightening enforcement at sea and Moscow warning that further seizures could trigger retaliation. Zaina Farizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
5 years after the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan, experts warn that restrictions on women and girls have deteriorated sharply, alongside a worsening humanitarian crisis. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis reports from Kabul.
5 years on, the consequences of Taliban rule are being felt across almost every part of Afghan society. A group of independent human rights experts appointed by the United Nations paints a grim picture. The ban on girls' education beyond grade 6 has now lasted 5 years, and it's leaving an entire generation without secondary schooling. Women also remain barred from universities and many jobs, with restrictions on movement, healthcare, and public life. The experts also describe the Taliban's restrictions as gender persecution and gender apartheid. They are urging support for accountability efforts, including International Criminal Court arrest warrants for the Taliban's supreme leader and chief justice. But the repression extends beyond women. Religious minorities, journalists, human rights defenders, and former officials are among groups reported to face serious risks. Public corporal punishment has also increased. The Taliban Supreme Court said at least 1,100 people were flogged in 2025. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis remains severe, with more than 17 million people facing acute food insecurity. Nearly 4 million children are acutely malnourished. Drought, funding cuts, and the return of millions of Afghans have added to the pressure. The experts are urging governments to restore aid, halt forced returns of Afghan refugees, and ensure that women have a meaningful role in decisions about Afghanistan's future. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Now we have a short break. Right after the break, we'll take a look at other top stories making the headlines today. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. We begin in Northern Europe. Latvia, an EU and NATO member, briefly issued an air threat alert on Friday for parts of its eastern territory bordering Russia and Belarus. The alert was lifted less than an hour later after Allied fighter jets reportedly shot down a UAV that had entered Latvian airspace. The Latvian armed forces did not immediately disclose further information about the drone or where it originated. But the military has warned that the recurrence of similar cases remains a possibility. The United Nations says that number of civilians killed and injured in Ukraine last month was one of the highest recorded in recent years. The figure is up almost a third month on month.
The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission today said that more civilians were killed or injured in the country in July 2026 than in any month since March 2022, marking a new high in this year's escalation of civilian harm. The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission verified that at least 437 civilians were killed and 2,610 injured in Ukraine in July, which is a 30% increase compared with the previous month and a 70% increase compared with July 2025. The actual figure is likely higher as the monitoring mission continues to verify information.
U.S. President Donald Trump's envoy Jared Kushner could travel to Israel next week for discussions on Gaza, according to reports by the Reuters news agency. The talks are expected to focus on advancing Trump's 20-point Gaza plan, including Hamas disarmament and the gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces. Jared Kushner is also expected to meet Egyptian, Qatari and Turkish mediators in Cairo. The visit comes amid disagreements between Israel and Hamas over the proposed deal. The West Bank remains tense after days of clashes between Palestinian families and Jewish settlers. The Israeli military says it has sent more forces to the village of Qusra to maintain security, while Palestinian residents say they are under siege.
Israeli troops entered Palestinian homes in the West Bank village of Qusra on Thursday. Village officials say Jewish settlers have surrounded 3 homes for several days.
The settlers are focusing on this area too much, especially Qusra. It is surrounded by 5 settlements, and these settlers are very fierce. They besieged this house, the house of Qusay Abu Rida. A whole family lives in this house. They have been besieged for 5 days without food or drinks. Even the foreign volunteers are not allowed to bring them food and drinks.
The siege began at the weekend. Settlers blocked the road leading to the homes, set up tents in the front gardens, and prevented residents from leaving. They also cut off electricity and water supplies.
6 homes saw their residents evacuated and taken over by the army. They are protected by the military helps them, there is mutual love. We saw them praying together, barbecuing together and dancing together. They are not very interested in helping the besieged families.
The Israeli military said it had sent forces to Qusra to protect residents and maintain security. It said the families would be allowed to remain in their homes. A day earlier, soldiers tried to remove the settlers but failed. Additional troops were later deployed to the area. The families trapped inside say they have run out of food and medicine. They also say settlers have thrown stones at their homes, damaged their property and shouted abuse at them. The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, said Israeli soldiers and police had gone to the area after a request from his office. He described the actions against the families as criminal. Palestinians accuse the Israeli military of allowing settlers to seize land with impunity. The West Bank has been under Israeli control since 1967. Around 3 million Palestinians and about 500,000 Jewish settlers live there. According to Israeli watchdog Peace Now, there are 146 official settlements and about 390 smaller outposts across the territory.
Hungary has warned that the extreme heat conditions across Central Europe are putting the country's power system under growing strain. Romania has also been forced to cut output at its last nuclear reactor due to falling water supplies from the Danube River. Here is more.
Hungary and Romania are facing disruption to nuclear power generation as record-low river levels leave reactors struggling to access enough cooling water amid an intense heatwave and drought across Europe. Hungary's Pax nuclear plant is currently operating at around a quarter of its capacity after output was cut to just over 10% earlier this month. The 2-gigawatt facility came close to a full shutdown for the first time in 44 years. On Thursday, Hungary began engineering work on the Danube to raise water levels around the plant. The plans include building a submerged barrier on the riverbed to control the flow of water. Officials are also preparing to sink 2 80-meter barges if levels fall further in the coming days. Prime Minister Peter Magyar said the situation remained difficult, with water levels expected to fall further.
The situation is still not simple. In fact, I could say that it is difficult, and a country has learned that at the PAX, nuclear power plant, a few centimeters or even millimeters can be of enormous importance and can directly affect production. Water experts say that PAX will have minus 121 centimeters by tomorrow morning. The Danube has started to recede again.
Meanwhile, Romania shut down its last operating nuclear reactor on Thursday after attempts to redirect cooling water failed to provide enough. The developments highlight a growing challenge for nuclear power in a warming climate. Europe has warmed faster than any other continent, and this year's extreme heat and drought have added urgency to the debate over how nuclear plants can adapt. Many reactors rely on rivers for cooling, leaving them vulnerable to drought and extreme heat. Both Hungary and Romania plan to expand nuclear generation, but are now looking at alternatives that are less dependent on river levels. Options include cooling towers and engineering projects designed to increase river flow. Nuclear power provides a steady supply of electricity without direct carbon emissions. But the latest disruptions show how climate change is creating new challenges for the industry.
Meanwhile, record rainfall has triggered severe flooding in eastern Japan, claiming at least 6 lives and leaving nearly 25,000 households without power. Authorities in the Chiba prefecture have deployed soldiers to assist with relief efforts after more than 360 millimeters of rain fell in a single day. The extreme weather inundated roads and railways during one of the country's busiest holiday weeks. The disruption also stranded around 7,000 travelers at Tokyo's Narita airport, though officials say flight operations have now returned to normal. Italy's Mount Etna has been spewing ash and volcanic material, with drone footage showing fresh activity on Thursday evening. The eruption has disrupted flights at Catania airport in Sicily. Arrivals were suspended until 8 o'clock Friday morning. Hundreds of flights have been cancelled or rerouted over the past week because of the volcanic ash. Mount Etna is Europe's highest and most active volcano. From all of us here at A News, thank you for your time and for watching. Stay tuned.